Hello again, and welcome back from the coffee break. We hope you've made good use of it and are now ready to start with the final panel in today's program and in the program of the What's New in Brussels event of this year. The title is very clearly, we hope, titled Stakeholder Voices, Expectations for the Future. And we thought with it and with its place in the program, it would be a good moment to reflect back on many of the novelties and news shared with us for the past 2 days from a stakeholder perspective. ENQA being obviously a stakeholder organization itself, representing national level funding agencies for internationalization, many of which are also the Erasmus+ national agencies. And we'll do that in good company. But before introducing the panelists of today, I'd like to maybe take a step back again and highlight some of the key issues that we see at policy and program level as we start our conversation. I think we're clearly transitioning, as we've seen already through the various interventions in the program, a period of transformations, a period of transformations that will be further enhanced through these new initiatives coming up this year at policy level within the European Union. And it's a period of heightened ambitions, I believe, when it comes to higher education. The very planning of this next generation of the Erasmus program has been already introduced a couple of years ago as a way to double the budget and triple the beneficiaries. So very ambitious goals. And if on the budget side, we haven't perhaps fully achieved everything we were set out to do, at the same time, the ambitions remain very high. I would like to also perhaps highlight in that context this ambition for widening inclusion, which is a true novelty, I believe, in the project and policy framework, with key developments coming up from the inclusion strategy to related strategies that will be set up by the national agencies for Erasmus+ national level, and all the related developments and foundational work that will have to be put in place at higher education institutional level. There's been also a wider call, I think, for stronger impact and for more evidence-based policy making, and we see evolutions in that respect as well through key analyses, key developments that are funded at the European level. And there's obviously a big push for wider digitalization, a push that was planned before the COVID-19 pandemic, but that has been certainly sped up or has been really emphasized. A transformation we see particularly when it comes to mobility and mobility formats, but not only. So these are some of the key issues we will be tackling in our exchange today in the panel with our 4 distinguished panelists here, reflecting also back on some of the more concrete, some of the more technical novelties, if you wish, that we have learned about also in the previous sessions. So allow me to start introducing the colleagues that you luckily already see here on the screen. Now we'll start with the ladies first, and with Maria Kelo, that is who is director of for the European Association for Quality Assurance in Higher Education, or ENQA in short, a network that Maria has been directing since 2011, being in charge of the overall management of the ENQA Secretariat and all the related policy and program work. I'm happy to say on a personal side, I've had the pleasure to work with Maria in the past at ENQA during her previous career in international higher education. So it's great to see you, Maria, here with us. Next, we have Dorota Maciejowska, that works as the head of the International Relations office at the Jagiellonian University in Poland. And Dorota is also importantly chairing the Academic Exchange and Mobility Working Group within the Coimbra group of universities, one of the stakeholder organizations represented also here in Brussels. Third, and now we go with the gentleman, we have Božidar Grigić, and that is head of the higher education field at CMEPIUS, which is the national agency for Erasmus+ in Slovenia, and also a very active ENQA member organization, I'd like to add, and to also give you a bit of an inside story, if you wish as well. Božidar is, amongst others, also co-chairing one of our thematic peer groups within ENQA that deals with the new mobility formats and all the implications of digitalization. Last but not least, a bit in the shadow, we have here today with us Dr. Nicolai Netz, who is a senior researcher at the German Center of Higher Education Research and Science Studies, DZHW, in Germany. Nicolai is there part of a research area, educational careers and graduate employment, and he's coordinating a research group on mobility of the highly skilled. Another colleague we've had the pleasure to work with in the past in some of our key mobility related studies, as Nico also worked for some time in the Euro Student project at the DZHW. So this is very in a nutshell, these are our four panelists of today, and a few words on the format as we start. So we will follow a similar approach to yesterday's afternoon's panel, meaning that we will have 2 rounds of inputs from our colleagues here in the panel based on some pre-crafted questions. A first round will be based on their key expectations in their specific areas of expertise. So as you see, we've outlined a number of questions to broaden a bit and deepen at the same time our conversation so far in the program. And a second round will be dedicated to enabling factors and some words of wisdom from the 4 of them on the future and the future of the program. We'll have time in between for questions and answers. So please do make good use of the Q&A box still. There will be 2 rounds of that and opportunities to address your comments or questions as we go along. So with that, I think we're ready to go with a first round in which everybody gets, each of them will get 4 minutes to respond, sorry. To start, I would like to address you, Dorota, with a question related to your specific role of chairing the Academic Exchange and Mobility Working Group within the Coimbra Group of Universities. Through that, I really understand that mobility and enhancing mobility, facilitating mobility is part of your bread and butter. This is also at the very heart of the Erasmus Plus program, as we know, and has been also probably the area most impacted in the past year of all internationalization activities because of the COVID-19 pandemic, especially the part on credit mobility, as we've learned through some of the previous sessions. So what I'd like to ask you with that is, what is the way forward that you see as part of your exchanges within the network for mobility, and how do some of these innovations that we heard of in the program, blended mobility opportunities, for example, how do those align with your post-pandemic vision? And a last twist to the question, if you wish, how can maybe these opportunities be maximized from your perspective?
Thank you so much, Irina. Thank you for the invitation. I would like to start with repeating that at Coimbra Group Network, as well as our daily university life, students are the most important stakeholders, and they are at the heart of all our initiatives. And at Coimbra Group Academic Exchange and Mobility Working Group, our goal is to make students and staff move freely within and beyond the EU member states. With this word freely, I have a special emphasis, particularly now when we are facing a number of mobility obstacles, to mention only, for example, the prolonging COVID-19, the Brexit, or just simply still existing variations in national regulations. So those obstacles force us not only to push forward our activities, but also to look back and rethink activities, to map what has already been done and reflect upon it in order to have common understanding of variety of offers and programs we cooperate within. And as for the new Erasmus Plus program, the Coimbra Group Network is very satisfied with the possibility of implementing, for example, the scheme of blended mobility and blended intensive program. It is really important now to implement the short-term mobility and complete the physical mobility with, for example, the pre-departure component or similar. However, in our opinion, to make Erasmus Plus even more inclusive and make it more real for everyone, we should go towards real flexibility, which means for us to open up for shorter mobilities also without blended component as compulsory. For example, students preparing to become teachers may go abroad for placements, but those placements are not always 60 days long, as Erasmus Plus program requires. EU could allow shorter credit granted mobilities, for example, between 5 and 60 days, as long as they are part of the study program, obviously. Also, short-term mobility for PhD students is for us double excellent, especially that it can support the co-tutel program, and as such can be a reply to stronger need for synergies between education and research mobility. And I think it should be also included in the upcoming and inevitable Bologna process reform in the future. So this is also very important for us. I have to mention also the need for flexible funding for implementing the green mobility, promoting all digital activities. What I would like to say more is, for example, the organizational support as an important issue, because we took a lesson from the COVID-19 outbreak that with regard to students in difficult situation, flexible organizational funds are highly required for us. So we observed also that equal treatment of Erasmus Plus students in crisis time is very, very important. We need the same support for program as well as partner countries participants, because international credit mobility allows less flexibility and is more complex, which is a real burden for dealing with obstacles. But returning to Coimbra Group Network and its mobility schemes, I would like to say that our network gained experience of more than 30 years, as well as around 20 years of exchange within our Coimbra Group Student Exchange Network scheme. And this scheme is also based on Erasmus Plus grant. And I have to mention that our real strength nowadays is the possibility of joining forces against Brexit, for example. We are now planning possible best solutions for this situation. We are discussing the possibility of a multilateral agreement, which can allow us to assure continuation of exchange among EU and UK partners. We are thinking about the synergy between Turing and Erasmus Plus and some institutional resources. So this is still under discussion, but this is very important for us. What's more, very important for us is also the initiative of European universities. Since European universities are the flagship initiative of the European Commission, we should specifically refer to this enterprise while talking about mobility of the future. Why? Because on the one hand, those are also part of Erasmus program, but most of all, the European universities, being small hubs, provide more comfortable environment for experimenting innovative mobility formats. For example, it would be very difficult to implement ad hoc virtual mobility scheme in a network of 40 universities like Coimbra Group is. But as a consequence to COVID outbreak, we could implement it quite smoothly within European universities alliances associating only several universities. So, for example, the Una Europa Mobility in Emergency scheme is a good, successful example of this kind of solution. So, on the other hand, our Coimbra Group network with regard to European Universities initiative can be also considered a great powerhouse, a space where we can learn from each other and where we can broaden our horizons on innovative mobility formats. So these mobility formats should be also applicable to new joint programs that we embed at our universities within European Universities initiative. Shortly, I would like to mention as well the micro-credentials and COILs, which foster flexibility in study programs and could be also in the future integrated with Erasmus+. And last but not least, I would like to mention that COVID crisis has also affected employers' capacity of hiring young people. So EU policymakers should support employment to avoid that COVID generation of graduates become a lost generation in the labor market. So thank you. This is the contribution for my work.
Thank you very much, Dorota. Highly, highly interesting, very comprehensive as well. We have touched already on a number of key issues. So I'm looking forward to us getting back to some of them. Thank you overall, though, for having actually made already very clear, I think, what the added value or advantage perhaps is of being part of a university network in times of crisis or in times of great transformation, if you wish. That's one of the key questions that we at ENQA had been wondering about during last year. To what extent universities that are part of a university network, a traditional network, already established network, or a network of the new type of the European Universities Initiative are actually better positioned, better able to manage these key obstacles that we've seen emerging. So thank you very much for that. We'll come back to some of your other key points later in the discussion time. And we stay with the mobility related intervention topic nonetheless by turning to Nico now, for who the question is really packed in this wider framework of the inclusion-related ambitions in the next Erasmus Plus program. As we know, high on the agenda is making mobility and mobility formats more inclusive in the next 7 years, and that is especially for underrepresented groups of students when we speak of student mobility. And that is an area that you, Nico, have researched quite a bit, particularly the area related to the impact of socioeconomic inequalities. So a specific type of underrepresented groups of students in higher education and in study abroad opportunities. So the question to you is a bit based on your research so far. What are the must-knows for us as we move forward to advancing inclusion in mobility programs, must-knows that come from your research on study abroad of students from disadvantaged backgrounds, and also what might be some of the key enabling factors for wider participation?
Well, hi everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be part of this event. I'm going to start with a short note on the must-knows. From the perspective of research, the new inclusion goals of Erasmus Plus are actually well justified because international student mobility is highly socially selective. What does that mean? It means that some student groups are more likely to spend time abroad during their studies than others. For instance, as most of you will know, students from a high social background, that is students whose parents have already completed higher education, are more likely to spend time abroad than students from a low social background. There is some evidence that women are slightly more likely to go abroad than men. Younger students tend to go abroad more frequently than older students. And then there are unclear and country-specific pictures regarding migration background. In some countries, students with migration background are more likely to go abroad than the native populations. In others, they're not. Now, according to European-wide data, and you have mentioned Eurostudent, Irina, this picture is visible for a long time now, and in the large majority of Bologna member countries for which we have data. In some countries, such as Germany, social selectivity and access to study abroad programs has even increased during the first half of the Bologna process. So it was students from a high social background who were most likely to be the first to profit from the cross-national opening of European higher education. So the conclusion in this respect is that the focus of Erasmus Plus on inclusion is actually timely and dearly needed. How to foster wider participation then, and I'm going to focus on the aspect of the social background for a minute. Research actually shows that, and this is arguably not a surprise, that students from a low social background are more strongly deterred from studying abroad by fear of financial strain and time loss. So I think that Erasmus Plus will help in this respect. However, it will be important that students actually know that they are eligible to financial support. And you may think this is trivial, but research shows that especially students from a low social background tend to not know in some cases. It's interesting to note in this respect that the pattern of social selectivity is visible even in countries where support for studying abroad is universal and actually very generous, such as in the Scandinavian countries. And this fact shows that there are other factors than finances that are important. In fact, students from a low social background have worse what we call performance-related preconditions for studying abroad. So what we mean is that they have slightly worse final school grades, which are important for access to mobility programs, they have also slightly worse language skills and slightly less confidence, therefore, that they can successfully complete a stay abroad. This partly results from the fact that they graduate from schools where they're less likely to acquire the skills and also the mindset that they later on need for studying abroad. So ideally, and I know this is difficult for higher education policy, the problem of social selectivity in study abroad participation in higher education should be addressed at school already. Lastly, one of the most important factors explaining the social selectivity in study abroad participation is that students from low social backgrounds see much less benefit in studying abroad. So what they need even more than students from a high social background is to be convinced that the effort of studying abroad is worth it. And in this respect, I think further informational campaigns will be helpful, and also the heightened attention directed to automatic recognition in the Erasmus+ program. I would also have a few notes of caution regarding new program features, but maybe we can talk about those later on during the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nico. Highly insightful as well. And just to pick up on one of the last things you've said on how students from socioeconomic disadvantaged backgrounds need to be convinced of the added value of the study abroad opportunity, a conversation we keep having more and more within ENQA, but I think also within our wider field of international higher education, is that there's a gap there also in raising their awareness that study abroad is actually also for them in the first place. And that speaks a lot about the kind of promotion measures we have in place for mobility opportunities, about the kind of channels for promotions that we use, and also about the kind of key messages that we tackle. A number of other really interesting points you've made. I'm looking forward to come back to them in the discussion time. And now moving forward to the third contribution in the panel in the first round, that would be from Maria, linking to one of the keywords that Dorota also referenced in her intervention, the work on micro credentials. Buzzword of 2020, big developments there, probably continuing buzzwords in 2021 and beyond. ENQA as a stakeholder organization has been and is still central in the advancement of the work on micro credentials. So Maria, I'd like to start by asking you what you expect the evolution of this micro credential work would be this year and beyond, and how does that link from your perspective to other innovations we see in the program, and what else gets you excited perhaps of the new program from a QA perspective?
Thank you very much, Irina. It is really a pleasure to be here, and thank you for your kind introduction as well. I was counting back now, and I was there when the first What's New in Brussels seminar was set up, a staggering 17 years ago. Can you believe that? Anyway, to the buzzword, micro-credentials, yes, indeed, it's coming out of our ears and noses and eyes. It's everywhere. At the same time, we have to remember that micro-credentials are not new, so they have been around for quite a while now. And they also don't exist only online. Of course, the COVID crisis have boosted the interest and attention on micro-credentials, but they've been there before as well. Also, we have to remember when we talk about micro-credentials that many of them, whether they are called such or not, are offered not only by higher education institutions, but also by organizations in the public sector, non-profit sector, and companies. And they can have very different purposes and uses and users. And we need to be aware of that diversity when we discuss related policies and programs, and when we try to create frameworks in which to fit them. So the European Commission has been working on a European approach for micro-credentials in the past year. It resulted from a political push to increase that kind of offer and quality offer of micro-credentials across the EU as a tool for reskilling and employability principally. Indeed, it was a collaboration, it is still a collaboration between the DGs in charge of education and of employment. And ENQA has been involved in that work, and we are very pleased to be involved in that work still, because the key issue in micro-credentials is really to ensure their recognition and validity. And of course, not only for the labor market use, but also for studies and integration into studies. And in order to create confidence in those credentials, we do need to have appropriate quality assurance mechanisms in place. It is not as complicated as it sounds, because we do have, at least theoretically, a solid framework in which these micro-credentials are included and covered by existing tools as long as they are offered by higher education institutions. These exist at the European higher education area level. The main challenge is, of course, to make sure that they are also covered in practice and not only at the theoretical level. And we are also involved in a project called Microball, and I will in a moment put the link to that into the chat. It looks into how to integrate micro-credentials into the European higher education area tools for recognition, ECTS and qualification frameworks, and quality assurance, and also to make suggestions to the Bologna follow-up group regarding eventual adaptation that might be needed. So this is something we will surely see take shape in the coming year. And I think in the Bologna process agenda, this will have quite a prominent role in the coming months. What I can predict, and I think that's not a difficult prediction to make, is that micro-credentials are going to grow. There is a market for them quite clearly, especially if and as they achieve a more serious and recognized status and some kind of a framework so that people have confidence that they understand what we talk about when we talk about micro-credentials. So then it will be more popular, probably little by little, than your average MOOC. And I think they have in that capacity a huge potential to be used very fruitfully for blended mobility. It could be a way to avoid all kind of problems related to recognition of mobility periods if it's actually recognized as a micro-credential towards a study. So we have a lot of practical issues to solve in terms of credits and quality assurance and recognition, and even the definition of micro-credential. And that will be what will be marking the work in 2021, 2022 for sure, so that we can really reap the full benefits of what we expect from micro-credentials. And I trust that many projects will be addressing this topic, and hopefully the Commission will then bring those actors together to discuss together how to take this agenda forward. Thank you.
Likewise, thank you very much, Maria. Very, very interesting for me personally to learn of these updates, because I must admit micro-credentials is not an area where I'm most knowledgeable. So very, very much appreciated. Taking some of the key takeaways perhaps of your intervention now. Also, I think you rightly said micro-credentials are there for some time. We don't own them, right, as a higher education sector only. So that's something to be aware of and keep in mind as we advance further with the different developments. I think you've very interestingly made the link with the Bologna process related developments, European higher education area indeed, and we've been discussing in part of today's program about synergies between different funding lines and actions, but when we look at policy synergies, just definitely the scope there for broader synergies between developments we see at the EU level, Erasmus Plus program framework, and with the other countries that are part of the Bologna process framework. So indeed we see, I think, evolutions going in the same direction, which is very, very promising as well. I think I'll stop now, though, with the reactions to Maria's presentation, although I'm tempted to continue, as you see, to also give the floor to Božidar for a first input in the first round of the panel. And to you, Božidar, the question is going to be much about the impact of the program as a whole, and also as a representative of Erasmus Plus national agencies, because the national agencies have been long contributing and pushing for designing more and more impactful programs, looking also much more into impact assessment. And I know that's been high on the CMEPIUS agenda in particular. So I'd like to ask you, what are your expectations related to the impact of the new program, and what do you think could be done to truly maximize it?
Thank you very much, Irina. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be part of this panel. Yes, I will start by saying that in parallel, as a national agency with the new program, new Erasmus Plus program, we have also revised our institutional vision, set new goals, and chosen new priorities or main areas of focus for each of the educational sector, which are also then aligned with European and national strategies, agendas, and priorities. And I think presenting those for higher education might be actually the best way to say, what is the impact that we're expecting or that we are striving for? So the first priority being closer cooperation with businesses, especially in field of STEM and connected also to green business or economy. Why? Because in order for HIs to achieve their mission to empower individuals for personal development, professional career, and active citizenship, they also need to cooperate with the environment. And through the cooperation with the economy, the competences that are further developed are such as innovation, entrepreneurship, high-level digital skills, and STEM skills. So this is one of the main areas where we are focusing. How we are planning to do that is we see especially big role here of the cooperation partnerships opportunity, and also encouraging student mobilities for training, especially in the STEM fields. The second focus area is actually the academic staff, which Irina, you know that as CMEPIUS we've been focusing on for some time already. We believe that academic staff is actually crucial in the process of development and growth of higher education institutions. Because if you have highly skilled academic staff who are innovative, enthusiastic, and transferring the knowledge to students and colleagues, and who are open, then they're driving the force of development in quality of every higher education institution. For this reason, we believe that more should be done in encouraging development of pedagogic skills and digital skills of academic staff, also through international activities, which may be either longer mobilities in order for them to be also counted in habilitation processes or cooperation projects. Last but not least, the priority in strategic and institutional approach to internationalization with focus on green and inclusion. What does that mean? It means that we would like to, for a higher education institution to set actually institutional processes that will foster green and inclusive international activities and then overall activities. Here, we also value and see big a role of our cooperation with National Quality Assurance Agency for Higher Education, where they're involved in HM monitoring. And we are hoping to take this cooperation also further, where we could also train the experts from the agency to be more in the field of internationalization. So when they're doing the quality assurance checks, they also put higher emphasis on internationalization as well. So yeah, these are those three where we are kind of putting our focuses on areas and hoping to achieve impact.
Highly interesting as well. Thank you very much, Božidar, for this perspective from a national agency at this time. Indeed, several of these topics are topics which exchange on quite regularly. And picking up on maybe two of them in particular, the staff mobility reference, as you said, on the role of staff in maximizing impact, I would say, of mobility opportunities, both for themselves, but also for the higher education institutions that they're part of. That is certainly an area of interest of ours as ENQA as well. I think, as you rightly said, it's been an area that we haven't given as much attention so far as we have to student mobility related considerations. So definitely high, I think, on the ENQA agenda as a whole too. And the role of cooperation projects, in looking back a bit also at our program, of course, there's great interest in the European University Initiative and what related funding opportunities might bring, but I think it's widely well received, this broadening up of the approach to cooperation and partnerships also in the next program. And hopefully as we advance and start the true implementation, we'll hear much more about other types of partnerships that we now see integrated into the program. We are now at the end of the first round of inputs, and we had planned to take in some questions, and we do have one. And it is a question phrased in response to Nico's intervention, but I do think it's perhaps a conversation we can have as a group and exchange our views on that. Thank you very much, Vihar, first of all, for the question and for being such an active participant today. The question relates, I think, to the identification of the disadvantaged groups that are to be further integrated in internationalization activities, in mobility in particular, but perhaps not only in mobility. And that is a real challenge, I believe. That is something we have lengthy conversations about, I must admit, again, also in the ENQA office with our colleague John Delap, that leads our work on inclusion, that not in all countries, as Vihar says here in the Q&A, it is actually possible, it is legal to identify, to label the specific disadvantaged groups that we want to integrate further in internationalization activities. So maybe from your different perspectives, as you come into discussion with a different focus, what would you have to add on this very real challenge that is quite foundational, I think, at the same time, because we have this broad political ambitions related to inclusion and this very tangible challenge of how to even know, basically, who to begin integrating further in the first place. Dorota, maybe we turn to you first as a representative of a higher education institution, because I imagine this is a very tangible challenge you must face as well. Can you share with us how you are talking about it? How are you addressing it, perhaps, in your networked work?
Yes, it's extremely tangible topic. And in fact, it's not very easy to reach those students and to make any kind of I wouldn't like to use the word selection, but the only thing, I suppose the only thing we can do is to promote strongly, to inform strongly at the university about various possibilities, and to make the easy access for those students to all possible granting possibilities. But actually, we can support them in various ways. We can organize some specially dedicated actions, but in fact, we don't have a ready solution for this. So I would rather ask other colleagues as well if they have any good ideas for that.
Thank you for your input. And I think it's also fair to acknowledge that this is a very high and big challenge for some higher education systems in Europe, not for all. So we also have a select group of countries that are in the fortunate group, if you wish, in that respect, or to turn it around, countries that have a much longer history of widening participation and focus on widening participation in higher education. I'm thinking particularly of Ireland, I'm thinking of the UK, where the identification of such target groups is no longer an issue, but it is because of years and years of prior work related to that, not necessarily related to internationalization. Nico, your input is the one that started this question in the first place. So what would you have to further add to that?
I think this is a really, really interesting and also difficult to answer question. Yesterday you said that we are all believers in internationalization, but you should not force anybody to become a believer in internationalization or to go abroad. So that's the difficult thing here. And also I think we need to pay attention that we don't scar or discriminate against any group by forcing them to go abroad. Having said that, in Germany, with specific funding schemes, such as the so-called BAföG, which is the General Student Assistance Scheme, it's actually possible to have some background information on the students. As far as I know, it's not being surveyed whether, for instance, the parents have completed higher education, but even more sensitive information is being collected, such as the money that the parents earn. And based on that, based on the means test, students either get more money, not only for studying in Germany, but also for studying abroad. So theoretically, it would be possible to introduce that in Erasmus+, but then directly I say this will probably be too costly. For some that you give out to students, doing a means test in every specific case would probably be too costly, cost too much time. So what remains maybe is to work a little more on information campaigns and on preparing material in such a way that you can ensure that different types of students find it useful and are being, I should say, invited to consider going abroad. And I think you could do that by systematically taking away fear that specific groups have. We know quite a lot about that, and highlighting the benefits in a targeted way. That would be my answer.
Thank you very much, Nico. Very useful as well. And I think that's really the key word there, targeted benefits, or highlighting the benefits in a targeted way, as you said. I think it's the connecting point between Dorota's intervention and yours as well. And the key, at least for the moment, seems to really lie in promotion and proper communication about the opportunities without, I think, as you rightly said, making this mandatory. We've worked on another project together on mobility windows, some of which were mandatory. So indeed, maybe not a model necessarily to promote across the board. Turning to Božidar now, perhaps with a more national agency perspective, keeping in mind also this big expectation from national agencies to come up with these inclusion strategies. How are you planning on addressing such challenges?
Thank you. Yeah, as you said, it's really a big challenge now, because, as you know, one solution is to promote, of course, all the opportunities, but if you cannot identify them, or if the participants don't identify themselves, then you don't know to whom to give these extra grants or financial funds or so on, and how to measure then the success of the program as well. So based on that, we are also now at CMEPIUS preparing the institutional inclusion strategy, where we will define more specifically all the groups, target groups, and how to address them. And hopefully here we will work also with all our beneficiaries, or at least representatives of beneficiaries. But just going back to what Nicolai was presenting in his starting presentation or thoughts, it's interesting also to hear from him and from the research perspective that, you know, there is a correlation between the weaker social background and then also the school success. And this is also one of the topics, or let's say, identification criteria that we were thinking here at CMEPIUS. So maybe to encourage institutions to encourage also students with lower school or academic success to go on mobilities. And in this way, I believe that we are also targeting many different groups from weaker backgrounds or disadvantages.
Thank you very much, Božidar, as well. And now let's quickly turn to Maria as well, because I'm watching the time and I see we're already a few minutes behind the schedule. So I'd like Maria to give you the floor as well on this topic.
I think I'm fine for this topic, so I'll save my minute for something else.
That's perfect. Well, thank you so much. And thank you, Dimitris, also in the Q&A part for the emphasis again on the GDPR related complications. I think those really speak to all of us. And yeah, it's an extra level of complexity for sure. Renilde also shared there with us an interesting example of how this is tackled in the Flemish community. And with that, I think it's safe to or good to also say that they are good practice examples. So they are actually successful ways of doing this. So beyond the enhanced and targeted communication that we talked about and the different roles that we can all play in advancing this, there's also some scope in disseminating maybe more about the existing good practices that are there already. Moving forward now to the second part of our panel exchange, focused even further on the enabling factors in our panelists' expectations or words of wisdom for the future. I'd like to start now briefly with a question that is very specific to Nico again, as Nico, beyond the effects of socioeconomic background and participation in mobility and study abroad in general, you also researched the effects of study abroad for the socioeconomically disadvantaged groups when it comes to their income on the labor market, and also more broadly to the careers. And I feel that's an area where we hold dear some myths, perhaps. I think generally we believe that the advantages are even higher for those that participate in mobility opportunities, for example, and have a disadvantaged background, particularly when it comes to career or income. Is that what the research shows, or rather not?
Well, the answer is yes. and also no. Yes, in the sense that socially disadvantaged groups seem to benefit slightly more strongly from studying abroad regarding the acquisition of language skills. That is provided that they have a minimum level of language skills before they go abroad, which is not always the case. And yes, also in the sense that there is evidence from Italy showing that students from a low social background are slightly more likely to benefit from studying abroad regarding the likelihood of enrolling in further studies and of having a job shortly after graduation. No, in the sense that there are studies from Poland and Germany showing that labor market benefits of studying abroad are larger among graduates from high social backgrounds, actually. In Germany, and this is the study that I have done myself recently, for instance, studying abroad has a positive effect on labor income in the first year after graduation only among graduates from a high social background and not among those from a low social background. And this effect actually increases throughout the first 10 years of their careers, which we do not observe among graduates from low social background. So what to make of these apparently slightly contradictory findings? I would say overall, I think that it is plausible that students from a low social background boost their skills more when they study abroad, because they do not have the same skills when entering higher education as do students from a high social background. This is shown very clearly by research, I would say. However, this higher marginal utility, as I call it, of studying abroad does not automatically seem to translate to larger labor market benefits of studying abroad among graduates from low social background. And here we don't really know why. It could be related to the fact that graduates from low social backgrounds tend to complete stays abroad at less prestigious institutions and possibly also in less prestigious countries and higher education systems. It could also result from graduates from different social backgrounds entering different labor market segments where study abroad experience is either important and therefore also remunerated or not. And finally, it could be that the students or graduates from a low social background simply do not sell their study abroad experience well enough to employers. And I think this last point could be an interesting leverage point for European policy in the future, helping students valorize their experience in the labor market. Whatsoever, further research is definitely needed on these so-called heterogeneous effects of studying abroad. And if you're interested, I would just like to mention that there is a special issue on this issue forthcoming in higher education in the middle of this year, and that the empirical papers have already appeared advanced online in higher education.
Thank you very much, Nico. Very, very interesting, and a lot of meat for another food for thought and things to further digest. So overall, I take it, yes, the benefits are confirmed, but of course, it's a much more nuanced implication than we might have potentially thought. I particularly welcomed your reflections on the longitudinal dimension of the added value or the benefits, and yes, everything basically you've shared, and look forward to explore that further. You've mentioned already the special issue. Perhaps you could also insert in the chat some of the other key references that you refer to. I think that would be very interesting for our colleagues attending today. Now moving forward to, you wanted to add something?
Should I do this now, or will there be something like a wrap up afterwards? Because I have a hard time following the chat and the colleagues in the panel.
No worries. I think we can collect your suggestions and share them
Would that be okay,
afterwards. Yeah? Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you so much. And now final round of questions for Maria, Božidar, and Dorota on some recommendations, perhaps from your different perspectives for a successful implementation of the program, because I think we're all united in our wish to make this program a success and to achieve some of these policy objectives. We might have different views on how to really do that. So that is the overall question, and starting with giving Božidar, I think, the floor to share his thoughts.
Thank you. Well, I think based on the experiences that we find so far, I think the most crucial is building further on the cooperation between national agency and higher education institutions. What do I mean by building on cooperation? It's like making them aware that we as a national agency are there to support, to guide, and to empower them in the implementation of the program that will help them in their internationalization activities, instead of, controlling their activities or what they are doing. Further on, of course, also there's a much needed cooperation with stakeholders and informing them about the mechanisms, but even more crucially, informing them about the impacts of these programs and how they are helping on building the quality of the higher education area on a national level as well as in the European level. And last but not least, to continue the good cooperation with the Commission, especially when it comes to the implementation of the program. Here, we hope that the Commission remains flexible as it has been during the last 7 years, where we've been, making the program in a way based on the realities in countries and among beneficiaries. So we were shaping the program, shaping was the word that I was looking for, shaping the program and implementing it based on the realities, and that Commission is flexible on that, and not sticking on the rules that were set in the beginning, but making it alive but still with a main framework.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think just picking up on your last point now on this importance of flexibility, it's a concept that came throughout, I think, our exchange today. And as you, I think, rightly point, it is a European program. It is a European policy agenda. At the same time, yeah, there is scope for allowing for some national flavors, national priorities, and twists that respond to realities on the ground. Maria, recommendations.
Thank you very much, Irina. With the key success factors, I would say I will start with a commitment. I think quality assurance has in the past been much about maintaining the known, maintaining status quo, traditional forms of education. And since in some contexts, the quality assurance has been accused of being slow to react to or even impeding innovations. So from our part, to make sure the implementation of the reform agenda will be successful, we do need to be ready to question the old forms of doing quality assurance and look for new and more flexible approaches, while of course at the same time being able to maintain confidence in the quality, because that's what we need. That's what international collaboration particularly needs, that we can trust each other's provision. But quality assurance has to remain fit for purpose and support high quality and excellence without creating all kind of unnecessary administrative burden. And in very practical terms, that may be particularly important for joint programs, European university alliances, micro-credentials, and so on, where the international and often interdisciplinary and we hope innovative nature of the initiatives creates complications if the old nationally based mechanisms are kept untouched. So from QA perspective, flexibility and trust will be the key words to successfully implement the reform agendas. And I do have a couple of recommendations as well for all the others on how to make that a successful process. I think that my first is a word of warning or appeal to remember and utilize the existing tools and frameworks. I've already said that we must avoid reinventing the wheel and most of all creating parallel systems between the EEA, so the EU level, and the EHEA level. We cannot really afford that. That would just create confusion and duplicate work. We do have a solid and well-functioning framework and a lot of tools. So a priority should be to make them really adapted and usable for the new forms of education, and if needed, really to implement them fully in the different countries rather than searching for all kind of new tools and structures. My second recommendation is that as unbundled education increases and these different forms of collaboration arise, we have to make sure that we don't lose sight of the quality of the whole and not only of its parts, because often the whole is intended to be more than the sum of its parts. So for example, for joint programs, it is very important that we don't look at the different segments in the different countries separately, but we use the European approach for quality assurance of joint programs so that we can really assess the jointness of the program and the quality as a whole. And my appeal is for the Commission to encourage, push, and at some point demand the use of that approach for Erasmus Mundus master's programs, whether at the internal or external quality assurance level. And of course, countries need to remove the remaining obstacles for the acceptance of that kind of accreditation. This is absolutely necessary if those programs are to flourish and increase in numbers. And my final very brief recommendation is let's not forget the lessons learned from the COVID times. I, for one, cannot wait to travel again. It's part of my life to travel. I'm always on the road. I haven't been for a year, but we have learned so much of the possibility technology offers. And we should not forget those lessons learned to have a future of a greener international collaboration with new forms of mobility, not as a replacement of physical mobility, but as a seriously considered supplement for those. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria, as well. Very, very strong points. I think very strong points from all of you, very clear directions for the future. Maria, thank you also for the self-reflection part, because I think that's indeed where the innovation starts. And it doesn't happen in all cases. That was particularly welcome. As I'm watching the time and I see we have only 5 minutes left of the exchange in the panel, and that we have not received any further related questions to the current point under discussion now. Allow me to also maybe add a couple of points from the perspective of ACA as a stakeholder organization as well, and particularly one that represents internationalization funding agencies as to what expectations of the future might be. As a primarily mobility funding agencies network, of course, we have been discussing tremendously in the past few months, in particular, the future of mobility and of physical mobility in particular. And I think while we remain core supporters of physical mobility and physical mobility opportunities, and we believe these must be enhanced and further promoted in the future to also reach, for example, underrepresented groups, but not only, that it could be made for more strategic. At the same time, I think we also hope that this approach in the program and the wider policy framework would support a more comprehensive conversation, a more comprehensive approach to mobility and mobility opportunities, where we perhaps get away from this opposition that we've had there for some time between physical and mobility and formats that have a digitally facilitated component, either as an add-on to the physical mobility part or completely digital. So hopefully we can indeed, as you were saying, Maria, see the whole and how the different parts fit together, have a more comprehensive conversation and approach to different mobility formats that would be fit for purpose without feeling like we necessarily need to pick one over the other. Now a bit more personal reflection, perhaps also, as you were speaking, Maria, again as well, about how you see the different parts fitting together. We have these very broad and ambitious policy goals. We are aiming towards more digitalization, towards greening the program and mobility opportunities in particular. We're aiming for wider inclusions as we start and move forward to more successful implementation. We will, I think, be confronted with addressing some of the tensions that might exist actually between some of these goals. I think the pandemic already showed us, for example, that digitally enhanced format might not by default lead to more inclusive opportunities, which is not a criticism, I think, in itself, but something to be aware of and to work on further. There's, for example, a push for greening Erasmus and having less of an environmental impact of mobility. At the same time, we are promoting shorter mobility programs with a wish to send more students abroad and thus have more travel. So I think these kind of issues we will really have to spend some time on in the next few years in the implementation part of the program. And maybe a final plea for data and analysis for more evidence-based, indeed, policy making. I think all of you throughout your different interventions had a reference to mapping exercises, to putting information together as a basis for further innovation and development. And as a think tank here in Brussels, and not only as a stakeholder organization, that's something we feel very strongly about. So I think the future now to really conclude by truly thanking you for all your interventions and for apologizing at the same time that we couldn't really, in the limited time available, dive into the many interesting points you've shared. I think the future lies in not only commitment, which indeed is important, but lies in enhanced cooperation between different types of actors with different mandates. And at the same time lies in being grounded more, I would hope, than in the past into solid research, solid analysis, and solid information and existing good practice that we have plenty of as well. So thank you very much once again for your participation today. Thank you, Nico, for having shared already some of the resources in the chat. Look forward to see the four of you sometime soon in person again. That would be nice. With that, I'd like to hand over to the ENQA president for the closing words.
Thank you, Irina, and hello again, everybody. This is the end of 7.5 hours of a very compact and intense European policy seminar that I hope all of you enjoyed as much as I did. I have been in this business for quite some time, but it was again very instructive and informative to see what is going on in Brussels and in the Union, both in policymaking and in programming. It would certainly be frivolous to try and summarize these 7.5 hours in a couple of minutes. The more so that the last panel has already given us an idea of many of the important takeaways. Let me just mention from a personal perspective just a few of the keywords that came up again and again. Let me start with a synergy between the different missions of higher education institutions: teaching, research, innovation, service to society. It has been underlined multiple times how important it is to create synergies between these missions, not only at the level of institutions, but also at the level of European funding and programs. And that for the first time there is one commissioner responsible for both education and research is already a good sign and a good signal, but needs to be translated in concrete programming. So I think one of the messages I remember from this seminar was what Wendy Sonnefeld said: synergy is not only about getting funds from different sources, but about going together. So important is what happens on the ground. Another keyword that came up also in the final panel was inclusion, a subject I have very much at heart personally. I won't repeat what has just been said. It is important to be inclusive because it's right and it's just. But it's also intelligent given the political situation that we see in many of our countries, with the rise of populist and nationalist forces. They try to create or reinforce a division between the people on one hand and a cosmopolitan, well-educated, well-off elite. I think it's very important that we are more inclusive in order to overcome this division and the perception of it. Our future in our societies and in our European Union will depend on bringing us together, and that also means bringing together a European community not only of the well-off and well-educated, but of everybody, and make international mobility more inclusive than it currently is. There were also two, if I may say so, elephants in the room that were moving sometimes and mentioned then, but that will be important for us in the future. One is the future of our cooperation with the United Kingdom after Brexit and after the decision of the British government to not continue participation in the Erasmus program. a decision we regret as much as British universities do. But let me underline just one thing. It's not only, and not even mainly, in the interest of Britain and of British universities to have these exchanges. It's also, if not mainly, in the interests of universities and higher education institutions in the remaining member states to stay in touch, to have access to and with some of the best universities in Europe, in a country where they also happen to speak English, so which is more easily accessible than some other countries. So it's in our interest to find a solution and a way out of the difficult situation that has been created by the decision of the British government. Finally, Corona has of course come up again and again. We will probably need to live with the pandemic for some time, but we also need to reflect on the time beyond the pandemic. So when we will be able to be mobile also physically again. So we need to learn a lot from the pandemic, as we had to react in an emergent situation very quickly. This is uncharted territory, and we will find ways only through many experiments and the exchange of good practice. There is probably not one recipe or one conclusion or two conclusions to draw from the pandemic, but there's many ways, for example, to find a new balance between virtual and non-virtual cooperation, learning and mobility. And it's important that we try out many things and that we share best practice. That is why I so much liked two appeals to, say, decentralization that were mentioned yesterday in the discussion. One was, I think, was Nadia Manzoni from the Commission, who said that individual national agencies shall define the criteria and the procedures to encourage and work for more inclusion, rather than have it been told from Brussels. Another example, which I liked very much, was what Kostas Yanidis of the European Student Network said yesterday. Let students themselves decide which risks and stress to take, rather than decide for them. And I think it's you, the people working in universities, in higher education institutions, in funding agencies, to find these ways on the ground, to be in touch with students and faculty members, and to prepare for a better future, trying out the best ways to achieve that. Let me conclude with a few words of thanks. Thanks first and foremost to all of our speakers and moderators who have done a wonderful job. Thank you also to you, the audience, and particularly those who asked questions in the Q&A sessions that made us all learn so much more than if we had only heard the presentations. And finally, let me thank the Secretariat that did once again a marvelous job in setting up this seminar, this time under unknown and novel conditions. And finally, also let me thank the technical support team that helped us overcome the challenges connected with an online seminar. So I hope with this to say farewell to all of you, and I hope to see you again, not only on a screen, but live, I hope. Goodbye.